Um, okay. Never mind. Anthony, you take us away because I'm just cursed.
Oh, welcome our wonderful friends. Happy post-Halloween day. What we got going on now is a fascination with some featherless furry friends. Our friends, the flying rodents of the sky, our bats. And today with us, we have two very special guests. If they would like to introduce themselves. So how about Donald, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Donald, and I'm a bat biologist. I've been working with bats for 25 years all over the world, and I currently have my own bat consulting company, which is my dream job. And
Nice.
yeah, so my specialties are bat echolocation and acoustic monitoring, but I've been around the block with bats a bit, so I can cover a lot of topics. Danielle.
Awesome.
I'm Danielle Odell. I'm an ecologist with a small nonprofit land trust on Nantucket Island in Massachusetts. I'm relatively new to the bat world, actually. We didn't even really know that we had a population of northern long-eared bats here until about 4 or 5 years ago. And so I've been on basically just fast tracking, trying to catch up on everything that I've missed. But yeah, mostly I just work with northern long-eared bats, and so far we're while the rest of the Northeast is not doing so well in terms of white nose syndrome, we're doing relatively well, and we have a huge population of northerns here. So we're trying to kind of figure out what it is about these coastal regions that
Very neat.
That's super cool research you've been doing. I mean, to find a hibernating bat using like beach houses, that's special, because you don't find hibernating bats that easily sometimes. So
I am so excited to hear you guys geek out about bats. But before we get there, I need one or both of you to just introduce what are bats and what makes them so special. Yeah. Can either of you tackle that for us?
I can take a swing at that. So yeah, bats are amazing, but they're mammals. They're amazing mammals. These are the only mammals that have evolved powered flight. There are, at last count, 1,406 of them across the world. They live everywhere except the polar regions. And they have a diverse array of eating habits and roosting habits, and they're cute.
Beautiful.
And are they rodents?
No, they are not rodents. Curse you. No, the Germans called them Fledermaus for flying mice, but they're wrong. Bats are not rodents. They are their own order of animals, the Chiroptera, meaning hand wing, because they're literally flying around the power of jazz hands. And yeah, so they're their own order. They probably evolved many millennia ago from ancestors of shrews, not mice.
Very
cool.
Okay.
I need to write down that jazz hands, because that's a good one. I like that.
I don't know.
A lot of kid talks, they like it too.
I don't know how I feel about all of powered flight being written off as jazz hands.
That's a good one. I like it.
So would we like to jump into questions that maybe me or Siav, or do we want to go to some of the questions that were left for the bat professionals on the iNaturalists Facebook page?
Well, I think we should start with us, because there were relatively few questions on the lists, and we need to get up to the ones that came in, because they were mostly from PhDs, and let's build let's build before we launch.
Build from there.
Yeah.
Okay, I like it. Sweet. Yeah, my first couple questions. I definitely am not any kind of bat scientist. I'm more of a generalist, but at the same time, something as specific as mammals that are flying gets me very interested. The first thing I thought of when you see these large fleshy wings, I thought about how certain animals have long ears, or actually mainly long ears. That helps with thermal regulation. So it helps them expel some extra heat, especially if they have a lot of fur. So I was thinking, what exact effect does the extraordinarily large, flappy arm flesh help with? Does it help with thermal regulation?
That's an excellent question, and I actually, part of my thesis, my master's thesis, was looking at that question. So I can try and take a stab at it.
All right.
One of my questions for my thesis was, I had bats living in a mountainous environment and bats living in a hot deserty environment, and I was wondering if the wing shape would be different in these different environments because of the different thermoregulatory needs. And long story short, I found that they were different, but not in the way you might predict based on thermoregulation. This particular species I was looking at, they like to hover in the forests and glean insects off of vegetation. And in the mountainous environment, where you might expect them to have more reduced wing area because it's colder, they actually had larger wing area. Whereas out in the desert habitat, they had smaller wings. And my speculation was, well, maybe the larger wing area helps them hover and get insects off of vegetation a lot easier, whereas the bats in the desert, they were taking insects more from the air rather than from vegetation. The bats in the mountains also had larger ears, which I think might have helped with them detecting prey generated sounds like what moths make, whereas bats in the desert had shorter ears because they didn't need to rely on those types of cues. But so that's one answer, so basically no is what I found. Yeah.
Interesting. It's more utilitarian. It's all has to do with how they use it. Very neat. Well, thanks.
Yeah. I'll say this though, there's a group of bats called the free-tailed bats. They're the ones that form the huge colonies that people are familiar with. On their wings, they actually have some venation that act as like little radiators. These bats fly super fast. I think they've been clocked going faster than peregrine falcons actually. And the theory is.
Whoa.
I knew that would get a rise out of sea.
What is this nonsense you are speaking?
I need to look it up, but I believe a recent paper came out that free-flying bats they weren't diving, they were just flying along, were clocked at speeds faster than a peregrine falcon. And they were these free-tailed bats that come with their own built-in radiators. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
I appreciate your expertise on bats, Donald. Yeah. Okay. Well, I look forward to hearing back from you about that.
I don't think he's gonna let that one go.
No, I'm totally looking it up right now.
Oh, that's great. Ladies and gentlemen, in one corner, we have the ornithologist expert. And in the other, was trying to challenge the status quo.
No, I think that what Donald is getting at is actually really important, which is that bats have a variety of wing shapes, right? So we have a tremendous amount of variability in essentially aerial habitats, right? So it's not just having wings, it's how do you use wings to access different parts of the sky. And I think, Danielle, your bats are pretty specific as far as how they operate, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's general convention or wisdom about northerns is that they're forest-dwelling bats and they love highly structured forests, like super dense forests, and they don't actually move all that much. But we're finding here that they maybe do things a little bit differently. We do find them in more open habitat, but yeah, they have like a relatively large wing area for their tiny little bodies, and they think that that's because they're slow flyers, but they're highly maneuverable, and that makes it easy for them to get through super dense forests, and then be picking insects off of branches and leaves. And but we do find them flying pretty long distances here, and they seem to be doing, like, the ones that we have transmitters on right now are doing the same thing every single night. They fly over really open habitat, and then they must be coming to feed and drink in one particular area, and then they fly about 1.5 kilometers back to roost every night. So yeah, I mean, everything happens on Nantucket totally differently than it happens, and that's like across the board, people, animal wise. So I don't know that what happens here applies to all places, but yeah, that is what the Northerns are known for, being in dense forest.
So that makes sense. If we think about like little songbirds in forests, they also have kind of a large wing area, or what we would call a low wing loading, right? So they've got a large wing area for a small amount of body mass.
Mm-hmm.
And that allows their maneuverability.
Yep. So what about some of the free-tailed bats that are traveling like huge distances every night, right? How does wing area correspond to that?
Yeah, well, so the fastest animals in the world, they have they have very long, skinny wings. They have a high wing loading, and also a high aspect ratio to describe their long, skinny wings. And these makes them not that maneuverable, not like the bats that Danielle is studying, the northern long-eareds, that are much more maneuverable in cluttered environments. These guys are built for open skies and migrating or moving long distances in a single night, very, very quickly.
One of the groups that Donald and I have actually been working on, of these free-tailed bats, is located in Florida, and it's amazing to watch the exit of these bats from their colony, and they just go straight up. There's no messing around in the local like meadow or woods or over the pond. They just go up. Oh. And so what are they hoping to bump into up there, Donald?
Yeah, well, these free-tailed bats have been found to go after high altitude insect migrations. So you have moths coming up from Mexico, perhaps, moving across the skies like 8,000 feet up. And so these bats are going up to those levels and finding moths to feed on. They find it's a niche to exploit for them. So it pays to go straight up and get your fill. Yeah.
Wow.
Are moths flying up at 8,000 feet?
Yeah, they're
wow.
They get up there. Yeah, I've done some radar work in the past where I've gotten to see. The radar work was to see how birds migrated, but we'd also see insects. And yeah, there's a lot of things flying above our heads, pretty high in the sky.
Wow.
It's pretty amazing.
That's cool.
So you can imagine during the day, we've got thermal activity, right? So pockets of hot air that are kind of bubbling up off the Earth's surface. And some insects are using those pockets of air deliberately to get up to catch essentially high altitude winds to move across the entire landscape. And some insects are just hijacked, just sucked up, and kind of along for the ride. So when I think of these bats that Donald's describing, I think of them as like little bat albatrosses, right? They're trying to cover huge amounts of territory over very quickly in order to take advantage of food resources.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. Pretty neat to think about the variability in this group of organisms.
And
Yeah.
are they doing, so these, you were saying that these particular bats that are doing this are in Florida? Do they do that only in Florida, or are they doing that elsewhere?
So
And is it only at particular times? Like you were saying during the moth migration, is that only happening at particular time, or?
So those are great questions. So the species we're talking about is Taderata brasiliensis. It's the Brazilian free-tailed bat that occurs across the southern United States and down into Mexico. So they're fairly widespread, not just in Florida. And the colony, the bat colonies people think of, the Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin, or Bracken Cave that has the largest colony of bats in the world, that's this species. And so when these bats emerge every night from like the bridge or Bracken Cave, yeah, a lot of times they're flying up to the high altitudes to catch moths. I don't know how to answer your question about timing, because I don't think that's a constant thing. But I do know, because I also know that these bats have been tracked flying, like, I don't know, dozens of miles across the landscape and foraging just over agricultural fields where they're really important for controlling agricultural pests. So I think, yeah, so I imagine there is a timing component there involved with the moth migrations, and otherwise they're just out voraciously trying to find other insects all across the landscape.
Man.
Well,
Yeah, that is super neat. It's kind of like a competition to see how high they can get between the prey and the predator. I like that. I got a quick question. I printed out a piece of paper to show how dedicated I am. And on this, I tried to print out a Vesper bat. Can you tell me if this is correct in saying this is a Vesper bat?
That is not a Vesper bat, sorry.
Google Images, you got me. Google Images got me.
That's a philostomid. Yeah, that's a philostomid bat, and you can tell because it has a nose leaf on it. And philostomid bats, they're called the nose leaf family. So it is an American bat. That's a California leaf nose bat. It's found in California and Nevada, but not a Vesper bat.
Well, very good. I probably run into these. I had a question about these beautiful, beautiful ears we got. I don't know if the picture's showing up too well, but we have these rivets inside of the ears, and that is something I've never seen with other animals. Can you guys explain what's going on there?
I can't explain the rivets in the ears, and it's funny. I just got that same question at a kids talk I gave on the exact same picture, actually. So it's a good question.
No way, really?
Yeah, and I can't, and I don't know. Well, hold the picture back up though. One thing that bats do have, that's on this picture, is they have a tragus, and that's that thin pointed thing that's kind of in the middle of the ear. That's this part of our ear that's been elongated in this case, and that is supposed to help with receiving echoes and directionality of sound. I imagine the ridges that you see in the ear too also play a role, but that I don't know anything about.
I've got speculation to offer. I've got zero facts here, but speculation.
Oh, yeah, let's speculate. I love it.
Okay, so if we imagine that how we use dishes to receive sound, right? Bats have all sorts of complexities on their ears and on their faces in general. And so we tend to use convex dishes, right? Or concave dishes to collect sound. And that's because it's the most simple way to focus sound. But if we're imagining something whose lives depend on the collection of sound as a resource, we can imagine that complex receiving structures might be advantageous, right? So all of those little shapes and the complexities of both the receiving and the production of that sound could be advantageous. So maybe it's about nuance in this case instead of just the overall size, right? One of the ways that we can think about wings, like we were just talking about, is that nuance of wing shape makes a difference for performance. Because you're structurally limited to size. there's a point where you cannot make your wings any bigger, but you can make them more complex. And so perhaps what we're seeing in bats is a similar phenomenon where nuance and complexity are taking over the role for just sheer size. Bat experts, do you have anything? Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think that's a bogus idea?
I think it's a good idea. See, I mean, you have to imagine that that bat has those ears for a reason. It's not just for decoration, or it's not just because that's a fun ear shape to have. Like all of these animals evolve to have for very specific reasons. And those ridges and the shape of the ears and the shape of the tragus must play some role in how it's finding its way through the environment.
I agree with that. And actually, when I give my talks to kids, I use this image to ask them. So I start with flying foxes, and they have huge eyes that allow them to find their food in the dark.
What is
and then I show this image. What's that?
What is a flying fox?
Oh no, gosh, I've skipped ahead. They flying foxes. That's a whole big group of bats that are only found in the old world tropics, like Australia and Africa.
Whoa.
These are the bats that look kind of like dogs or foxes. They have a very canine appearance. They have very simple ears, and they don't have like nose leaves like this guy has. And they tend to have large eyes, which they use to find fruit or flowers in the dark. And then bats like this one that Anthony has, you can tell from their big ears that they are using hearing to try and find their food in one way or another.
Have you ever seen the pictures of the scarab beetles with the tremendously complex, like antler-like antennae?
No.
Okay. There are these great beetles, and we'll put one up on this video. But they have what are called palmate antennae, so they're like antlers.
Okay, yeah.
And it's because when they need all that surface area for chemoreception, for essentially the ability to smell, but they just can't make them sails. They can't make them that big. So they've got these folding structures. And when I'm thinking about these bats, I'm thinking about them in the same way.
Yeah. And I think, and so like that bat that Anthony has showed, when they fly, they collapse their ears into it's called a ram's horn shape. And that helps them be more aerodynamic.
They can control their ears to that degree?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Huh.
Yeah.
So when they're flying, they're tucking their ears? That's so crazy.
Not tucking them, more just collapsing them. I mean, and maybe we can find it. I'll send a picture so we can put it on here too. But it literally looks like a ram's horn curvature to it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Huh. That's interesting, because you imagine that when they're flying, they have to be listening the whole time too. Right?
That's a good point. Yeah. So I don't know what's going on there.
Danielle, when you see your bats, which also have big ears, right?
Yeah.
Can you see the ears when they're in like late evening or late afternoon or early evening flight?
I don't know. I mean, I have no idea. I've never been able to really get a good observation of them while they're flying before.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like to the point where I would be able to see. They're just so small and it's so dark that I never have noticed what their little ears are doing. I mean, they are called long-eared bats, but they're not really all that long.
Yeah. Compared to the picture, Anthony, they're long relative to other members of that genus, but pretty puny compared to the other bats, like what Anthony was showing. The more I think about this, I think when they do the ram's horn thing, that's just when they're at rest. I don't think they're actually doing that when they're flying around. Ignore the aerodynamic part. I think it's more just but they can control it to let them go down. Cool. When you catch them and you want to get a good picture of them, they inevitably put their ears down. So you're like, come on, let's Get those ears up.
So Danielle,
Come
if you don't get to see your bats, how do you study them? How do you follow their lives?
So we know where they're flying based on acoustics. We have pretty much set acoustic detectors all over the island to get an idea of like where are some areas that are a lot more activity than others. And then once we pinpoint those areas, we try to catch them with mist nets. So we go out into the forest and we look for narrow corridors that they might be flying through. And so we'll put up nets, and with the hopes that we will basically surprise them, intercept them in the middle of their flight. And so we catch them in the nets, and we actually have really pretty good luck here. We have a few spots where we almost always catch bats. So once we capture them, we put little bands on their wings, and the bands are individually marked so that every bat has an individual number. So if we ever recapture them, we know who they are and when we originally. And we attach little tiny rice-sized radio transmitters to their backs and follow them around for a couple weeks. The transmitters are so tiny that the batteries only last 18 to 20 days-ish. So once we get them on, we pretty much are full on tracking bats every single day. So we just follow them to where they're roosting. Sometimes we try to follow them at night. Once we get them, you know, when they're out flying around, we'll try and track where they're going, which is not that easy to do. And then we'll track them during the day to figure out where they're roosting. So in the summertime, if we're tracking them, we're looking for maternity roosts, and at this time of year, we're looking for where they might be hibernating.
And you said your island doesn't have like big forests, right?
We don't have, no, I mean, so we're only about 14 miles long by 3 miles wide, tiny little island. And most of it is like the whole southern half of the island is really coastal shrub, sandplain grassland. We do have some pitch pine, scrub oak barrens. And then in the northeastern corner of the island, we have some deciduous forest, but it's really small. It's really, really small sections of forest. So we are finding that the northerns will move through the shrublands and the sandplain grasslands, and it seems like they're kind of island hopping, like they hop from little patch of forest to little patch of forest. So if I put a detector near if there's even a lone pitch pine tree in the middle of the sandplain grassland, I will pick up northerns there. But if I have a detector maybe 100, 200 meters away out in the middle of the sandplain grassland, we'll pick them up, but not nearly as much as we do just over there by the tree, you know? So it seems like maybe they are, I don't know if they fly and rest, or I don't know if they're just keying in on the trees or what. I'm not sure what's happening.
Wow. Very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been fun. It's been a fun couple of years.
And so where do they sleep? Where do they have their maternity colonies and their hibernations?
Yep. So if you've ever been to Nantucket before, you'll know that all the houses here are covered in cedar shingles. Every single one of them is, they all look the same, all cedar shingles. The bats love the cedar shingled houses, and they get up underneath what's called a rake board, or basically a trim board. And so we found colonies right on people's houses before, but then we've also found them in old pitch pine snags, and even live pitch pine too. If there's a big crack in the middle of a branch, or a big knot or something, we'll find colonies in there. And then we are really trying to find more in the red maple swamp areas this year. So I found one roosting in a tupelo today, and they are in the big knotty red maple swamps too.
Wow.
Oh man.
Yeah. So, and then for hibernation, we are finding them in crawl spaces and like cinder block basements. Yep. Sometimes they'll get, like, if there's floor joists at the top of the crawl space, we'll find them roosting on the joists, but sometimes they're actually down inside the cinder blocks, in the middle of the cinder blocks. So yeah, just like, we don't have any caves or mines, which are what they are normally hibernating in, and so they're using what they can here. So basements and crawl spaces so far. And we think that they may actually be hibernating in trees. We have colleagues that are working with us on Martha's Vineyard, and they have been convinced for a couple of years that their bats actually stay in the trees for the winter. And they also find them in basements as well. But I have always assumed that either the transmitter fell off a bat, because I keep, sometimes I'll keep tracking them to the same tree over and over and over again, and I think, okay, the transmitter just fell off. But Liz and Luann at Biodiversity Works and Martha's Vineyard are convinced that no, their bats did not drop their transmitters. They're actually just hanging in the trees. So that's hard to imagine. That, I mean, it does get cold here. It usually doesn't get much colder than 10 to 20. But I don't know. I don't know. They could be.
Lots of mysteries, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
There's always
absolutely.
thing to follow.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it'd be really cool if they do document them hibernating in trees, because I think that would be the first time that's been found for bats. And what I like about the bats you have hibernating in crawl spaces is this species, northern long-eared bats, when they're found in caves and mines, they're typically found in crevices within those caves, which is one reason why they're harder to census than other bats that you might just see hanging from the ceiling and can count them. Whereas these guys, they like to just wedge themselves away and can therefore be underrepresented. So it makes somewhat sense that they're finding crevices in man-made structures too. Yep. Very cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
And fun.
Yeah. Very neat. So this would be in an area that wouldn't be ridiculously cold to have the tree situation happen.
I didn't catch the second part of that, but I think, yeah, I mean, we are definitely warmer than mainland New England, just because we're surrounded by the ocean. We're tempered a little bit by warmer ocean water. So we don't typically get the really, really cold temperatures. We get very little snow, a lot of rain, a lot of wind, but little, good. Yeah, it's not usually all that cold here. If we get below 20, cool. I'm whining about it.
Good. Sweet. Yeah. My next question is a obvious one, but maybe not to most people. For me, it's not, because I'm asking it. I hear all the time, blind as a bat, right? Blind as a bat. This dude's blind as a bat. And then in Daredevil, they're like, actually, bats aren't blind. They had that in the TV show. I'm like, you know what? I should investigate this. So we have rods. We have cones in our eyes. Cones differentiate color. Rods differentiate the light. What does our eye, human eye, compare to in terms of, let's say, like, in general, bat species? Obviously, there's probably some variants, but how blind are bats?
I'll take that one. Yeah, bats aren't blind at all, and they can see just as well as you or I can, in general. And it's their vision is probably most tuned to crepuscular periods, dusk and dawn, which kind of makes sense because that's when they like to emerge and start to forage. And then, of course, the flying foxes we were talking about earlier, they have large eyes and don't rely on echolocation at all to find their way around in the dark. So they're using basically really good night vision to find ripe fruits or flowers to feed on. So there's definitely variation in the bat world, but none of them are blind by any stretch of the imagination.
Boom. Perfect. I'm glad to hear that. Sweet.
I heard
what about
color
difference?
Recently?
I know that they're
Oops,
You got
sorry.
it. You go.
We're just talking about these myths that come up surrounding bats, but somebody said to me that when bats emerge from caves, they always fly left. And I'm like, where would that have come from? And so I had to Google, like, what is this? Like, I had never heard that myth before. And apparently it's a thing that goes around, but I don't know where that thought would come from. I can make up stories about where blind as a bat comes from, but why would they fly left when they emerge from a cave? I have no idea. That was a new one. No, nobody got anything.
I've never heard that. I've never heard that myself. But it just goes to show how many fables there are around these mysterious creatures. But yeah, that's a new one for me.
All right, I have a theory.
Okay.
So, typical rivers flow from north to south, right? So if erosion happens in caves, maybe God, this is a stretch. Maybe most caves that are flowing have open mouths towards the south, and so when the light is waning, it's going in the west, which means that if they turn left, that would be the last place that the sun would have been. So, you know what? Yeah, sorry.
Wow, wow. I'm impressed that you could go there that quickly.
Yeah, I think you just found your next research project there. I think that's a good graduate.
I just see my divining rod stick from where I find it in the forest and just lick my finger and feel it. That's all the science I need for that answer.
Ooh.
Oh boy.
Okay. I've got a question for you. Why is it that bats are associated with Halloween? What is it? Is it just the cave association? Or what's going on there?
Spooky creatures of the night? I don't know.
Yeah, that's kind of, I don't have a good explanation for that either. Although I assume it has to do with the association with Dracula and, the vampire that changes into a bat. And then we do have actual vampire bats in the world.
So we talked about them the last time on the Naturalist podcast, but please tell us about vampire bats and what's the deal there?
Ooh, well, they're pretty great animals. So I guess starting general, there's 3 species of vampire bats in the world. They're all found in the neotropics. And one of them is the common vampire bat that feeds on mammalian blood. And then the other 2 feed on avian blood. And they're a lot rarer because, I should say this, the common vampire bat's a lot more common because we have so many cows and pigs and farm animals in the neotropics now. So, but yeah, they're great because they have a lot of different adaptations for getting at their food. One of which is that they are one of the few bats that's good at moving around on the ground. And so bats, when they're approaching a victim, they might land a few feet away and kind of tiptoe stealthily over to the animal in question. And then they have these heat sensors in their face that can tell them where the blood is closest to the surface of the skin. So that can help them direct where to make a cut with their super sharp teeth, which are extremely sharp, so sharp that the animal probably doesn't even feel that it's been bitten. And then they have this anticoagulant in their saliva that allows the blood to flow freely, so they can just sit back and lap up the blood like a kitten drinking milk from a bowl.
That's extra creepy. Wow.
A creepy kitten, yes.
Creepy kitten. That's amazing.
I have never heard about the heat sensor. So it's like a pit viper.
That's super cool.
Yes, and I don't know that much about the heat sensor aspect of things either, just that they have them and it helps them find where to bite.
Wow.
Wait, and in case you already said it, but just for the people that are listening, that are scared of vampire bats and all bats because they will turn into vampires. Where are these vampiric bats located?
Vampire bats are only located in the New World tropics. So basically from central Mexico down through northern South America. So unless you travel in those regions, you don't need to worry about them.
Very good. Awesome. My friends will be very happy to hear that.
And do people need to worry about them in general, or are they mostly going for like cattle?
They will feed on people. And I've talked with people that have had that experience of sleeping outside in a hammock, and they wake up and there's a furry critter licking at their big toe. And so, but because cattle and pigs and things are so widespread, they're more likely to go after large livestock than after a camping human. But the issue that people and the livestock need to be careful of is that rabies. So very, very few bats carry rabies. Like worldwide is less than 1/2 of 1% of bats carry rabies. But vampire bats, probably because of their blood diet, it's a lot more frequent. About 30% of vampire bats carry rabies. So if a vampire bat feeds on you, that's a cause for concern.
So I'm a little confused because I think of rabies as being lethal to whatever's carrying it, right? So you hear about a rabid dog is on its way out. You hear about a person with rabies is on their way out. Is that not true for bats?
It's true for bats. Well, yeah, it's true for bats. A rabid bat often isn't long for this world either, but it can, the disease can maintain itself in the colony. I think because bats just seem to have a good defense against diseases in general. So, yeah, and this is getting in a territory that I'm not that familiar with, but I do know that that's a good area of where medical folks are really researching how bats are so immune to a wide variety of diseases, including lots of coronaviruses.
Yeah. So while we're here, right? While we're here with coronavirus, understanding that there's some interesting disease dynamics going on with bats, right? But can you tell us a little bit about what that search is like, or the edges of diseases with bats? And then what I really want to transition to is, why do we need to protect bats instead of get rid of them?
Well, we need to protect bats for lots of reasons. That's the easy question. the disease one, that's not really my area, but from what I understand, there's a hypothesis that has to do with bats generate a lot of heat when they're flying, and so that's one of the theories as to why they are more resistant to diseases, because they burn them up in a blaze of glory when they're flying around. But again, I think it's just a small piece of the overall pie in that sense.
If we think about a human getting many different types of disease, we think a lot of times we respond with a fever, right? So our system temperature rises in an effort to burn off the disease, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. And so the idea here, and you correct me if I'm wrong, for bat experts, is that bats are running just generally at a higher temperature. And so that makes them more comfortable with maintaining a higher level of general disease. That high temperature that they're running at, that high metabolic rate, is also why they need such cool adaptations like hibernation. Mm-hmm. Is that true?
I would concur with those, with that, yes. Yeah, I mean, that's my understanding as well. But then I get uncomfortable talking about it.
Yeah, only what I've read. And I never thought that I would be learning all of this stuff until this year, really. Just things have gotten crazy and everybody's freaking out about bats, and bats, you're going to get COVID from bats. And yeah, so it's totally on the very limit of my knowledge, but there are a lot of seemingly plausible explanations about why bats can carry so many viruses and diseases and seemingly have no problem with that. So, and I think rabies is one that is an exception to that rule. Like rabies will take a bat out eventually, but for the most part, all of these other viruses that they're carrying, like, big name viruses like Ebola and Marburg and Nipah, and they're able to live with them and sometimes live with multiple viruses. But I think that a lot of people get to your point about why are bats important and why we should be protecting them, even when at a time when everybody's freaking out about look what a single bat has done to the world, is that the bats themselves are likely to lead us to the answer on how to treat these viruses in the future. So understanding their immune systems and how they're able to coexist with these viruses coursing through their bodies all the time is likely going to be part of the answer in terms of how do we go forward with figuring out treatment for humans for pandemics that are probably more and more likely as we continue to degrade bat habitat and march our way into wild spaces more and more.
So I think that's a wonderful answer, Danielle, and I really appreciate it. When bats shut down for this season, they shut down that engine and they go into hibernation, they're faced with some particular problems at this point in North America, right?
Yeah.
Which are their own conservation challenges.
Yep. So with white nose syndrome, normally if they were to get the fungus that causes white nose syndrome, if they had it on them in the middle of the summer, they would have no real problem with that disease. They could easily shed the fungus, they'd clean it right off, and they would just carry on their merry way. But because it's affecting them specifically when they're hibernating, that's a big problem, because apparently, and I don't know all of the ins and outs of this either, but apparently their immune systems are functioning slightly differently in the winter when they're hibernating, and most of their systems are kind of shut down to an extent than they are in the summertime. So they're just not, they don't have the defenses when they're hibernating that they do at other times of year.
And to add to that, the other aspect is, so yeah, this fungus is growing on them throughout the winter, and it irritates them. It's itchy, so they keep waking themselves up, arousing out of hibernation to groom themselves and fight back on the fungus. And the issue with that is that then every time they wake up from hibernation, they burn a lot of energy that they've stored away. And so they do this enough times throughout the winter, waking up to groom, they will eventually, around Valentine's Day, start starving, and they'll exit the cave looking for food, desperately trying to get the energy they need.
Wow.
Any idea where white nose came from?
Yeah, it came from Europe. They've traced it back to Europe, and it likely came over on the shoe of a recreational caver or somebody just visiting a cave in upstate New York. The ground zero was this cave in upstate New York around 14 years ago now. And they now have learned that fungus occurs in Europe, but the European bats don't seem to be too bothered by it now. But for a long time, people have realized, wow, there's not a lot of bats in Europe. but there sure are a lot in North America. And now the theory is that maybe white nose already went through the European bats back, decades ago when people weren't really paying attention to them. And now they've evolved their own defenses against this fungus, which are now being studied to see if we can apply those to our own bats.
Wow. So bats face a lot more problems from humans than humans face from bats.
Very much so. Yes.
For sure.
Well put.
You got any other questions, Anthony?
Oh man, the things on my list were, hey, what myths can you dispel? What about COVID? And my final question for this whole thing was, when you tell people right now that you work with bats, how do they respond?
For the most part, people are pretty interested. Some of them look at me a little sideways. Like today, I ran into a bunch of people. I'm walking around in the woods with an antenna in my hand, like trying to track down my bat. And this whole family I could just tell they're all staring at me, and none of them was going to speak up to ask, like, what are you doing? I just said, I'm tracking a bat. And they were like, what? A bat? And then they just ended up with a million questions. Like 9 times out of 10, or really 99% of the time, people are super interested and excited about the work. Very rarely do I get anybody that doesn't want to hear it at all. I mean, they may think I'm a little bit weird, but they're at least interested. But I will say that this year, more people have been concerned when they find a bat in their house, or they find a bat on their house and they call and they're just flipping out because it's too close for comfort. Like nobody wants to hurt them. They all want to do the right thing, but they're really concerned what it could mean for their health. So, and that's, I would say that reaction was new this year. I mean, people always are wondering about rabies, but now they were like, oh my God, COVID, so.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I mean, people that work with animals that aren't super popular, of course, and usually nocturnal animals, don't have the same appeal as I work with a tiger, But I feel like bats are in the mid ground right now. I don't feel like they're super threatening, but I can see how people would feel a little perturbed. But that's, like you said, it's super neat, and in the essence of it, it's amazing. What about you, Donnie?
Yeah, I find it's a great litmus test when I'm at a dinner party or a gathering of people I don't know, and they inevitably ask, hey, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm a bat biologist. And their reaction tells me a lot about how the rest of this encounter is going to go. If it's like, then things probably aren't going to work out too well between us. And then, but so like Danielle was saying, I don't get that reaction as much as I get, oh, that's so cool, that's the best job ever. And I'm like, yeah, it is. But yeah, I do get probably 30% of the people I tell randomly, I get that reaction. And I think it's, for them, it's mainly revolves around just their own childhood perceptions of bats. And maybe they got scared by one as a kid, or they've seen the scary movies. A lot of it just has to do with, the preconceptions they've grown up with, not because they've actually had an encounter with a bat and hated it for that reason.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate both of your time. We do have one question from the website that I'm going to try to pull up here if I can.
I've got it here, see.
Okay, so if you don't mind, we've got a question from the world for our bat experts.
All right. So this question comes from Casey, and it's an excellent question. I like this a lot. But the question is, why have flightless birds evolved so many times on oceanic islands and not flightless bats? So, yeah, I think that's just a great question for a lot of reasons. And I'll just say that I I don't think anyone has officially answered this question. I did look. But I have a pretty good theory, I think, for why bats have not become more terrestrial when they colonize faraway islands. And my theory is their hindquarters are just really lacking. They have very puny, slender little legs that are adapted just to help them hang on from trees or from rock ledges. Their hips are rotated and their knees bend backwards. So they're really their legs are not good for supporting body weight of a standing, running, walking animal. Whereas birds, they fly, but most of them, I believe, have pretty decent legs to stand and walk and run on. So that would be my Donald's theory of evolution of bats here, is that I think it would just take a lot more for bat legs to revert to something useful for them to walk around on. And so related to that too, so as Casey also mentioned on that thread, there is one species of bat right now. Sorry, I have a cat visiting me. There's one species of bat out there, Mysticina tuberculata, that lives on New Zealand. And this bat has adaptations for terrestrial living. In fact, they're called burrowing bats because they like to spend a lot of their time foraging through leaf litter for animals. They fly, but they also have, when they forage, they tuck their wings back and walk just on leafy rear feet with a long claw to help them dig, and a few other adaptations for. But this Mysticina tuberculata, this comes from a group called the Mysticinidae, the family of burrowing bats, and this is the only surviving member in the world anymore. There used to be two other bats in this genus on New Zealand. One died out 15 million years ago. It was 3 times larger than the current species, and then the other one hasn't been seen since the 1960s. And then you have other distant relatives in this Mysticinidae family from Australia. 3 species have been discovered through fossils so far, and they're all had these adaptations for being terrestrial, but they also no longer exist. So my theory is that it's just not a very good, successful design for bats to be on the ground, probably because they're just not that good at moving around.
Danielle, you're an island bat expert. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I don't. I would have to say, I mean, I did see Casey's question and I thought, well, they just must not need to, or like they're so good at what they do that they just must not need to. But that Donald's explanation is awesome. Works for me. Yeah.
C, do you have any burning theories?
Oh, I don't know. I always have burning theories, but they're largely irrelevant because we've got bat experts with us, so we don't need to even go there.
I am not an expert.
Oh, yeah, you are. But I want to say thank you once again for joining us. I really do appreciate it. And if people want to follow your work with bats, where can they find you? How can they follow you?
So the nantucketconservation.org has links to most of the work that we do, not just with bats, but with all of our other research. So that's probably the best place, just to go right straight to our website. I'm super bad with social media. I know I need to be better, but I just can't bring myself to do it.
All right.
And then for me, I can be found through my website. Put the the address up here, but it's www.vesperbats.com. And that leads you to my consulting company where I specialize mainly in echolocation monitoring of bats. But I also do a lot of outreach. And so I do a lot of virtual talks right now for classrooms all across the country. And then in my I live in Northern Colorado, so I also do friendly neighborhood bat talks for people who want to learn more. And I can be found there.
Wonderful.
How
Well,
about
thank
you,
you folks
Anthony?
for hanging out with us today.
Wait, Anthony, where can people find you? Where can people
Oh my
follow
gosh, me?
you?
Let's see. I have my adventures posted on the Instagrams of Outdoor Anthony is my name. And yeah, actually, I think I'll be posting some Halloween pictures of some competitive pumpkins. But other than that, yeah, it's just a bunch of animals. Outdoor Anthony, you could check me on Facebook. And then other than that, if you're looking for some archery lessons, check me out on Craigslist.
Well, that is fantastic. And we will hope to see you all next time with the Naturalists.
Thank you,
Thanks, you
folks.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.